In five, four, three, two, one. And I think now we are live on Facebook. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to today's session. I am Ishan Sharma, founder of Karwan, the Heritage Exploration Initiative. And today, I think it is a time for us to celebrate a small victory. We have reached the target of 5,000 subscribers on our YouTube channel. So that's a small achievement for us, but really something that will help us in organizing more and more sessions. So we will request you all to, if you haven't subscribed the channel yet, please do subscribe because your love and support is something that keeps us going. Without resources, we are doing our level best in organizing more and more lectures for all the history students out there. So thank you so much for your support and love. Today, today we have a very special guest, Dr. Shraddha Khambojkar, who is an assistant professor at the Department of History, Savitribai Phule, Pune University, and whose area of expertise includes a vast array of subjects and themes, including modern South Asia, historiography, nationalism, memory studies, and most importantly, Dalit studies. He is the author of two books, Nationalism, Literature, and Creation of Memory, and 19th Century Maharashtra, a reassessment that was edited. She has also contributed research papers in various national and international publications, and she is very much reputed for her contribution in the discipline of history. So today, Dr. Khambojkar is going to talk about Dalit consciousness, a historiography, and knowing the fact that you are here to listen to her and not me, I would formally invite Dr. Khambojkar to deliver today's Karwan special lecture. Over to you, ma'am, and thank you so much for accepting our invitation.
Thank you so much, Ishan. Um, it's such a pleasure to be able to share the research work that I've been involved in for over the last few years and over the last few research projects. One always misses the element of feedback. How much ever feedback one gets from friends, it's always a welcome initiative when there are people from outside your usual circle of friends who want to uh, listen to you and give you feedback. So I'm really thankful to Karwan, the Heritage Exploration Initiative, for giving me this opportunity to share some of my thoughts here. I'm also thankful to Professor Anirudh Deshpande for introducing me to this initiative. And I'm very grateful and thankful to my teacher and former head of the department, history, Professor Deepak Gaikwad, who initiated me into the way Dalit history can be seen, the way there can be different perspectives of trying to understand the history of the Dalit people. So let me begin with these thanks. The title of my presentation today is Dalit Consciousness, Historiography. I'm going to read from a paper and it's going to be a presentation of about 35-40 minutes or so. Let me begin. Durandar Medbawkar was a sewage worker in the Mumbai Municipal Corporation. While he was forced to earn a livelihood from the dangerous job, he armed himself with education and completed his graduation. He was already a part of the vibrant Dalit Panther movement in Mumbai. Let me just see if my WhatsApp is on. No, the sound is not coming from my WhatsApp, right, Isha? It is. Yeah. Yeah. So, while Durandar Midbawkar was forced to earn a livelihood from the dangerous job, he armed himself with education and completed his graduation. He was already a part of the vibrant Dalit Panther movement in Mumbai. His insights and experiences found expression in a collection of poems which was first published in 1985, Nagaputracha Kavita. Today, he lives a retired life, happy in the knowledge that his children are pursuing their own respectable careers, one in New Zealand another in Mumbai. I shall begin this presentation with a poem by Dhurandhar Midbankar. Just like the sun. When I set forth from my ramshackle home, how the roads were cackling at me. Those savvy roads were inebriated. They were intoxicated, unleashed like galloping horses. So I became a road and galloped away, just like an unleashed horse unto my horizon. Today, as I tread back on the same road, their masks have changed at the sight of the torch of light that my hands hold. Moral: masks of the morons are made up of the embarrassed ashes from the crematorium. The ashes, unlike the sun, are immobile. However, we must keep going unto our horizon, just like the suns go, because we are also the sun in their colony, very much in their colony. I began with this poem because I feel that it conveys a sense of what Dalit consciousness is about. It is about humble beginnings. It is about a journey that requires indefatigable strength. It is about an absurdly stubborn and stagnant opposition. And finally, it is about necessity to struggle towards manifestation of the uniqueness of one's abilities. The thoughts that I wish to share today are tinged with the humble realization that this is only a historiography of Dalit consciousness, and that there are a great many probabilities and perspectives with which one may approach the idea. One could, for example, approach the subject through an epistemological lens rooted in the discipline of the history of consciousness as undertaken, practiced by Professor Hayden White, or through an ontological one as done by Professors Gopal Guru and Sundar Sarukai. Many trajectories are possible. I'm going to attempt something which, according to my late teacher and friend and colleague, Aniket Javren, might be a good takeoff point in understanding the journey of Dalit consciousness, namely obliterating or willful forgetting of what has become the common sense. So, willfully forgetting all sorts of philosophical and theoretical formulations that have been floating around the idea, let's start afresh and seek an open-minded understanding of how and in which directions has Dalit consciousness evolved. As we begin to explore the historical evolution of the consciousness of being Dalit, one becomes acutely aware of the tethers that bind down any such endeavor. For example, as a researcher, one may not have any lived experience of being a Dalit. Primarily as a result of what Rohit Vemula called the fatal accident of birth. One might not be compelled to carry the identity of being trodden upon that the etymology of the word Dalit implies. And yet here we are, trying to make sense of how Dalit consciousness germinated in some minds and what has been its journey since. Why does one dare to take this cross-cultural plunge? Considering the horrifying history of caste-based discrimination and a frustrating apathy of the society, a visceral hatred of all the non-Dalit people could be justified. However, experience tells me that an open mind and an assurance that one is trying to understand the discrimination with a goal to alleviate it begets wholehearted support from most academic endeavors. This is what sets me free to share my thoughts with this assembly today. I share them in the hope that I may get further feedback, insights, and advice on the subject, which may help me clarify my thoughts further. I also seek your indulgence that my examples will be primarily from Maharashtra, as Marathi is the language I am most comfortable with. I quoted Rohit Vemula's phrase, fatal accident of birth, for another reason. The phrase may serve as a reminder that the label of a caste or a gender or any such identity is only an accident. Just as being born with a set of organs may not necessarily align with one's gender, similarly, being born in a specific caste does not necessarily determine one's mental makeup. One learns and unlearns the expected sets of behavior as a member of a caste or a gender stereotype. In fact, if this crossing over of the boundaries of caste appropriate norms was not possible, it would be very difficult to imagine any potential for what Aniket Zavre called traversability of segmented sociability, moving over, crossing over the boundaries. Thankfully, there are different fords and bridges afforded by different intervening agents: law, education, literature, music, films, arts, and technologies, which help us cross over the boundaries that our identities have built around us. It might be useful to remember that birth is a mere accident and does not automatically correspond with one's potentials and abilities. A technology invented by a woman does not automatically become a feminist technology. Such an essentialist understanding is counterproductive to the cause of feminism itself. Similarly, a poem created by a person born in a Dalit caste does not automatically become infused with Dalit consciousness. This, I believe, is what necessitates a historiography of Dalit consciousness, which might outline the different trajectories in which the consciousness of being Dalit has been manifested over the past. A historical overview of the evolution of the caste system has been ably dealt with by a number of social scientists, ranging from Dr. B.R. Ambedkar to Eleanor Zeliot and many others. Here, I'll try to restrict myself to the manifestations of the Dalit consciousness with the understanding that the word Dalit signifies an identity of suffering branded onto the mind and body of a person who was born to parents from the supposedly untouchable castes. A working definition of Dalit consciousness for the purpose of this discussion could be that it is an awareness of the collective and individual identity of suffering which comes with being born a Dalit, and the drive to change the situation through a struggle on a variety of fronts. The struggle is guided by the thoughts of Dr. Ambedkar, Sant Ravidas, Periyar, Gautam Buddha, and other revolutionary thinkers. Thus, one may or may not be born a Dalit, and they may still have an awareness of the Dalit identity of suffering and the drive to struggle for change. It's like the people of all skin colors standing against racial discrimination, or the people with different sexual orientations supporting the cause of LGBTQ people. It may be useful to note that non-Dalits have also played an important role in the creation and evolution of Dalit consciousness. Mahatma Jyotirao Phule and Savitribai Phule are a case in point. The Phules were not born in an untouchable caste and spent their entire lifetime working towards material and intellectual well-being of what they called Shudra Atishudras. Both faced threats to their life, were denied opportunities to publish their progressive writings, and were socially ostracized. This was a price they paid for the spread of education among the disadvantaged sections of the society: women, Shudra, Atishudras, and so on. Here is an excerpt from an autobiography published after a century had elapsed since the Phules had begun their schools. And I quote, the autobiography is by Madhav Kondvilkar. It's entitled Mukkam Post Devase Gothne, first published in 1977. The quote begins, "Master, whose photo is this?" Vithu asked. "Mahatma Jyotirao Phule," I said. "Is he one of us?" he asked. "Of course he is ours," I said proudly. "Haven't heard his name before," he said in a low voice. I said in my mind, "You still have a long way to go." Then he looked at the picture of Dr. Ambedkar. "I know him. He's the one who improved the Mahars a lot." "Not just them, he improved us as well," I said emphatically. "How so?" Vithu raised a doubt. He was given an answer by Shanta's husband, who said, "How do you ask such a thing? Our children get education, they get jobs. Who did this? Did our children get admission in schools or jobs before? We too looked on, dumbfounded. Unquote. The point that I'm trying to drive at here is that Dalit consciousness need not be understood in essentialist terms by restricting it to the castes in which one is born. It may be useful to emphasize the acquired aspect rather than the hereditary one. In 1910, R.A. Lamb, a British member of the Bombay Governors Executive Council, was invited as a chief guest for the annual prize distribution ceremony of a school for untouchable children. The school was run by the Depressed Classes Mission under the supervision of Shivram Zanba Kamble. Mr. Lamb, in his speech, mentioned the Koregaon Memorial, which he visited annually. He drew attention to, and I quote, the many names of Mahars who fell wounded or dead, fighting bravely side by side with Europeans and with Indians who were not outcasts, unquote. Shivram Zanba Kamble began organizing annual gatherings of the untouchable castes at Koregaon, and Dr. Ambedkar also visited it in 1927. The memorial today is deeply ingrained in Dalit consciousness as a site of memory of a glorious Dalit past. History always serves a therapeutic function, and sites such as the Koregaon Memorial or Diksha Bhumi serve as the reminders which keep the Dalit consciousness alive. Dalit consciousness is not all about remembering. It is also about willfully forgetting or obliterating, as mentioned earlier. An example from Baby Kamble's autobiography may not be out of place here. A poor man's wife wanted to send a letter to her husband working in a city, letting him know of the goings-on in the village home. The wife is faced with a dilemma. How can she maintain the decorum of language and still let the husband know of the poverty and depredations at home? She chooses her words carefully. She dictates the letter to a school-going boy thus, and I quote, Right, my son. The armies of Kutte Khan have attacked us. There was chaos in the palace. Ambarnath fell down, Parulnath was severely wounded, Champavati was abducted. Unquote. The husband understood the intended meaning that the dogs had barged into the hut. They took away whatever chapatis were there, pushing and throwing the utensils down in the bargain. The willful forgetting of the pathos, the humiliation, gives birth to a dry sense of humor, which gives a sharp edge to the manifestations of Dalit consciousness. This does not mean that Dalit consciousness glosses over the reality and lulls the victims into a quiet acceptance. Far from that. Shantabai Kamble writes of her experience of wearing the bangles. She notices that the woman who sells and helps her put the bangles onto her wrist wears a different woolen clothing every time Shantabai visits her as a customer. This is to avoid the vital pollution caused as the woman must touch Shantabai's hands to ease the bangles onto it. Shantabai narrates the episode to her women friends in the community. They all stop purchasing bangles from this woman. The woman eventually notices that this has caused a considerable dent to her income. She is forced to declare that she will not practice the changing of clothes when Dalit customers visit her. Dalit consciousness motivates people to struggle for justice. The struggle may not always be vociferous or aggressive, and it still achieves its objectives. Kumud Paude writes about the sea change in the attitude of her father-in-law, who belonged to a supposedly high caste. He despised Kumud and her children, so much so that the grandfather would not accept a customary namaste from the grandson, that is Kumud's son. 18 years have passed since this event. Kumud writes, and I quote, Today, my father-in-law is a changed man. He keeps telling anybody who's ready to listen that He is very lucky to have found such a daughter-in-law about whom he confides he had a huge misunderstanding because of her caste. However, he says, castes are useless. It is the humanity which works. Today, when I fall sick in the village, I just tell my servants, don't worry, take me to Kumudbain. She will put everything right. Unquote. Dalit consciousness consists of a constant struggle for change. It may be at the level of an individual relationship, like Kumudbai's father-in-law. It may be a professional relationship, such as the bangle seller. It is also a struggle against the political authorities. The Dalit Panthers once put up a very strong agitation in my city of Pune when the then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi had to change the route to travel through the city. The Panthers, who were simply trying to draw her attention towards the miseries of the Dalit people, were beaten up and arrested. The struggle comes with a price, and Dalit consciousness instills a pride which helps people pay the price gladly. Sharan Kumar Limbale, in his text entitled Towards an Aesthetic of Dalit Literature, describes Dalit consciousness as, and I quote, a belief in rebellion against the caste system, recognizing the human being as its focus, unquote. J.V. Pawar, a founding leader of the Dalit Panthers movement, has also documented the history of this movement. The movement is unique in understanding the evolution of Dalit consciousness because it tried to traverse the segmented sociabilities put in place by the caste system and also tried to establish an ideological relationship with the Black Panthers movement in the USA. The Dalit Panthers constantly struggled against the elite hegemony in different fields. In literature, they challenged the control and influence of the literary tastes legitimized by the high castes. A number of little magazines were started by the members of the Dalit Panther. They offered a great departure from the established norms of classical literary tastes in the Marathi language. The movement busted the classical norms in all possible directions. Poems were written in non-metrical form, using non-chaste Marathi words, dealing with subjects that the middle-class consumers of literature were blissfully unaware of. They had to face severe criticism from all quarters of the establishment. Some poets were sued for their stinging use of words, challenging the ideas of nationhood and unity of the society. Others were court-martialed figuratively in literary magazines for their use of explicit language. Still, they stood their ground and remain popular authors till date. Protest literature as a manifestation of Dalit consciousness was also seen outside the mainstream literary circles. Folk theatre forms in Maharashtra always had a strong presence of non-Brahmin castes. Dr. Ambedkar's thought was communicated and popularized in the non-elite circles through various art forms. Ambedkari Jalsa is a unique performance format which played an extremely important role in nurturing Dalit consciousness. In fact, the Ambedkari Jalsa performances offer an insight into most aspects of what constitutes the Dalit struggle for justice. The Jalsa performances drew thousands of viewers as the Jalsa Mandali would travel through cities and villages. In the 19th century, Satyashodak followers of Mahatma Phule had initiated these political comedy performances, and hence the Ambedkarite movement of the 20th century was no stranger to the techniques. Ambedkarite Jalsa performances dealt with a number of themes relevant to the lives of the Dalit publics. They criticized social evils such as drunkenness, illiteracy. A couplet goes, and I quote, "If you educate your children, you will live a life of luxury. This art of writing has put everything right," unquote. Another couplet depicts the high caste criticism of the Dalit conversion to Buddhism under the leadership of Dr. Ambedkar. A high caste snob in the Jalsa, he says, and I quote, "This is the height of stupidity, that people have converted to Buddhism. Ambedkar has been deceived, unquote. The snob, of course, gets a snappy answer from the Dalit woman who conveys that it was an emancipatory act which helped the Dalits find their selfhood. Thus, Dalit consciousness is manifested in all its glory through the Ambedkari Jalsa performances. Physical movement and manifestation of the Dalit consciousness obviously had their limitations. First, the looming threat of caste-based atrocities, stigmatization. These would limit the physical coming together of the Dalit publics. Secondly, the material resources to travel to a site of protest would also be scarce for the Dalits, to put it mildly. As a result of such factors, Dalit consciousness seems to have found better manifestations in literature and performances as against protest marches and physical gatherings, which have always faced a very real danger of violent retribution. These limits on the physical mobility do not weigh down the literary manifestations of Dalit consciousness. While we have recently heard the happy news of a book entitled Coming Out a Dalit, receiving the Sahitya Akademi Award, it marks a long journey of social critique offered by a string of authors rooted in Dalit consciousness. Dr. Ambedkar stands tall as the guiding star for the fellow travelers striving towards human emancipation. Kartar Singh, alias Polonius, recounts a memory of Dr. Ambedkar in 1947. A self-proclaimed nationalist offered some unsolicited advice to Dr. Ambedkar. You should be wearing a national costume instead of the Western suit, Dr. Ambedkar, he said. Dr. Ambedkar asked innocently, but what is our national dress? Why? Whatever our ancestors used to wear? The learned doctor responded, how can we prioritize some ancestors over others? If we go back to the original ancestors, Adam and Eve, who wore no clothes, would you follow them? The rationality and the iconoclasm that mark the approach of Dr. Ambedkar in his words is something that is a benchmark of the literary manifestations of Dalit consciousness as well. Self-critique is a unique phenomenon that is abundantly found in these manifestations. Baby Kamble offers a critique of the dual nature of the patriarchal behavior of women from her family and community. She says, and I quote, the world had bound us down in the shackles of slavery. But were we also not humans? Did we also not nurture the desire to lord over someone? But who would allow us to lord over in this society? So, we also found a convenient route to oppress our own people. We began to oppress our own daughters-in-law, unquote. It's important to note here that the Dalit consciousness of the author does not stop her from criticizing her own family practices. Not only at the personal level, even at the level of the movement at large, many leaders have offered glaring critiques of the Dalit movements. In fact, the recent book by Unnamati Sham Sundar has underlined the need for a critique of the critical portrayals of subjects dear to Dalit consciousness. Coming to the recent manifestations of Dalit consciousness, one cannot overemphasize the opportunities offered by the digital technologies and the cyberspace. A small survey that we conducted 4 years ago in my university showed that even if internet connectivity is made available free of cost to all students on campus, one can see that the students who still cannot make full use of the potential benefits of this connectivity, they tend to be the same students who are disadvantaged due to various reasons. Scheduled caste students, this survey found, did not have to endure lack of access, precisely because of the strong networks that they had with the students from different backgrounds. Dalit consciousness definitely played a role in giving them the courage to ask for what was rightfully theirs. In the larger arena of the digital technologies, source materials relevant for Dalit emancipation began to appear online in the year 2000. This was also the year when the International Dalit Solidarity Network was established. From 2001 onwards, Dr. Ambedkar's speeches, reported in the Hindu back in 1951, found their way into the online edition of the newspaper, which was indexed and archived by Francis Pritchett in his pages on the website of the Columbia University. These have proved to be important for the emancipation movement as widely used source materials to date. A Maharashtrian Dalit engineer had begun the work of Dalit emancipation and solidarity from a different location a few years before this. The first ever Dalit International Conference was organized through the Dalit International Organization, Malaysia, in October 1998 in Kuala Lumpur by Mr. Rajkumar Kamble and his colleagues. While the internet may not have been used for organizing this conference, its documentation has been preserved with the help of the internet. After 20 odd years, the pamphlets and the photographs of the conference are preserved on the website of this organization. These bloomed further into the Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar International Mission, AIM. The AIM has not only organized a number of follow-up conventions of Dalits in Paris and the US, it has also been instrumental in organizing a conference at Columbia University in 2013 to commemorate Dr. Ambedkar's arrival over there 100 years before. Around 2008 in India, the internet began to be effectively used as a medium to achieve what the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions were able to achieve in the Western world. In September 2006, members of a Dalit family were abducted, raped, and killed in the village Khairlanji in eastern Maharashtra, with no witnesses ready to testify. Mainstream media did not report the news for weeks together. A Dalit government officer used the potential of the internet by publicly uploading the report of the fact-finding commission, which documented the findings about the crime. The report was quickly taken down from the website, but by then it had been widely shared and reported in the mainstream media. Whether the action helped secure justice for the lone surviving member of the family is a different issue. But the internet was usefully harnessed to at least give voice to an otherwise voiceless victim. The arrival of YouTube and Facebook in India are two phenomena that gave a further boost to the idea of using the internet specifically for purposes relevant to the Dalit people. Dalit music has always been a very popular genre in Maharashtra. YouTube videos of Ambedkarite songs are some of the most viewed videos in the world of Marathi music. Non-Bollywood Ambedkarite songs by the famous family Anand, Milind and Adarsh Shinde have easily garnered millions of views. Dalit Camera is a popular YouTube channel operating since 2007, and it has more than 6 million views for its videos, films and documentations relevant to the Dalit lives. A number of films pertaining to the issues that the Dalits are interested in are easily available and widely shared on YouTube. There are films featuring Dr. Ambedkar's speeches, his funeral procession, clips of Dalit leaders' speeches, episodes of the television series Samvidhan and others, which dealt with the making of the Indian Constitution, and even videos of untoward incidents such as the riots in early 2018 at Bhima Koregaon. These were filmed and shared by the members of the public. Facebook also is a very popular medium for bringing about Dalit solidarity. The story obviously has a grim side too. A Dalit smartphone user was murdered in Shirdi over an altercation regarding his use of an Ambedkarite song as his ringtone in 2015. This is by no means a solitary instance. The Bhima Koregaon riots in the New Year week of 2018 also had a strong relationship with the content spread through the social media. Competing and contradictory narratives of history were floated in the build-up to the event which commemorated the Battle of Bhima Koregaon that took place 200 years ago. Videos were virally circulated with the aim of fanning communal hatred, and these resulted in loss of at least one life and property worth millions of rupees. Present-day contestations for social acceptance are almost always played out in the field of historical narratives. Bhima Koregaon riots were no exception. Beyond physical violence, epistemic violence is also a very real threat to the Dalit movement. A number of activists have expressed the apprehension that the internet, like most media technologies, tends to limit the manifestations of solidarity or dissent to a set menu, a safety valve, as it were, in such an entrenched fashion that there's no possibility of a real disruption in the established systems of exploitation. It is, however, evident that the real world and the virtual world are not as mutually exclusive as they may seem. Social media outrage about an issue most certainly forces the authorities to take some action. A tribal farmers protest march to Mumbai in the spring of 2018 would have gone unnoticed, but for the positive tweets and hashtags of sympathy posted by the urban and otherwise aloof citizens of Mumbai, which played a good part in forcing the government to accept the demands of the tribal farmers. The government, judiciary, print media, and the political leaders have all been forced to take notice of the subjects that trend on the social media. So virtual may not be so virtual after all. To sum up, so far we've made the following points. One, Dalit consciousness may be understood as an awareness of the collective and individual identity of suffering which comes with being born a Dalit, and the drive to change the situation through a struggle on a variety of fronts. Two, Dalit consciousness need not be understood in essentialist terms by restricting it to the castes in which one is born. It may be useful to emphasize the acquired aspect rather than the hereditary one. Three, Dalit consciousness motivates people towards a constant struggle for justice. The struggle may not always be vociferous or aggressive and still achieves its objectives. 4. Dalit consciousness seems to have found better manifestations in literature and performances as against protest marches and physical gatherings, which have always faced a danger of violent retribution. 5. The rationality, self-critique, and the iconoclasm that mark the approach of Dr. Ambedkar in his words is something which is a benchmark of the literary manifestations of Dalit consciousness as well. Let me end the presentation by the excerpts of an interview we took while we were involved in a project to understand the lived experiences of Dalit Buddhist students on our campus. I quote, question, when you look at the photos of Buddha and Ambedkar, they make you feel happy. Why is that? Interviewee responds in Marathi, translation. The photos are inspiring. I always remind myself that you are where you are due to these people. Their efforts, their thoughts, that is why you are in the university, for example. If it weren't for Buddha and Ambedkar, I would be in the village, perhaps working like a slave and victim of atrocities. When my friends ask me why I have these photos on the wall, I don't answer then, but I wonder why they ask such a question. Unquote. To go back to the sense that the poet Durandar Mitbaukar had conveyed, Dalit consciousness motivates people to struggle and to rise above their destiny, just like the sun. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for this very moving presentation on Dalit consciousness. And as you said, Jyotiba Phule and Mahatma Phule, to Ambedkar, and to, for example, Rohit Vemula. These are all icons, these are all figures of Dalit consciousness. in today's society. We have some questions for you, I think. The first question is from Mr. Pintus, and his question is, which is the new book? Can you write it down at the end of the speech? Uh, Sir, the name of the book is Coming Out as Dalit by Yashika Dutt. It recently got the Sahitya Akademi Yuva Puraskar. So congratulations to Ms. Dutt for such an amazing book. Zoya Zevi makes an observation and she has a question as well. Her observation is that the presentation is very comprehensively researched, showcases the insight into the Dalit consciousness, and what we need is a change in the mindset of the so-called upper castes, a so deeply ingrained idea of superiority that it will take centuries before peoples are counted as equals, not divided by caste and creed. What do you think?
I agree with you, ma'am. It's like a disease, the disease is in the minds of the high caste people, and so they need to treat themselves, and it's not the other way around. It's not the Dalit people who have to strive, and other people have to just say that this is your struggle. It's not like that. Also, the fact that diversity of all sorts is something that is also economically a viable and a um, profitable choice that any organization can make. This is something that has been proved over and over again by the likes of Prabhat Patnaik and many others also in the Western world. So we need to have a society which, as you have rightly said, which works in tandem with each other and not a society which works on the principles of exclusion. So I completely agree with you that it is the initiative needs to be taken now from the side of the so-called high caste people, yes, and also we need to work hand in gloves with each other, in tandem with each other, holding hands and not fighting among ourselves. So yes, I would definitely go for that kind of coming together.
The next question is from Sanil MN, and his question is, there are Dalit debates on epistemic priority. So what's your take on the epistemic priority?
Epistemic priority. I did not get what he means by epistemic priority. The thing that I spoke about was epistemic violence. And by this, I meant people do not give recognition, people do not give the credit where it is due to the inventions, discoveries, contributions made to the field of knowledge by the Dalit people. One. Secondly, if one sees a student in the classroom setting, for example, who does not have the right kind of accent, who does not have the right kind of linguistic acumen, but he or she wants to say something in the class, teachers many a times seem to, or even the students, I mean, I'm not saying only teachers are to be blamed. The society in general tries to discourage them from manifesting what they have to say. So I think it's important for us to simply realize that we've got one mouth and two ears. So listen more and speak less, especially when it comes to, you know, listening to what people who would not usually dare to speak in a classroom setting or in any public, on any public platform. So it's important for us to not indulge in epistemic violence, not indulge in snobbery of any sort by denigrating what a person who just doesn't have the right kind of cultural capital, perhaps, to we should not discourage people basically from manifesting what they have to say. If we are in the position of authority. If we are not in the position of authority, then we should not desist from speaking out just because we don't have a linguistic acumen or accent or whatever. Speak up, speak up, speak up. That is the only thing that one can say in this regard.
Yeah. The next question is from Harshavardhan Elluri, and his question is: does the postings on Facebook relating to Baba Sahib's ideology really influence different sections across caste, class, and gender?
Do these postings what?
Really influence different sections of class, caste, and gender?
Hmm. Yes, they do influence, as in they do have an impact. What kind of impact is a different thing altogether. Sometimes people are so entrenched in this idea that anything relating to Dr. Ambedkar is simply not for us. It's not something that one should give respect to or give attention to. If one is, imbibed with that kind of an ideology, then no amount of rational argument is enough to make a dent in their ways of thinking. But if one has an open mind, if one has a attitude or approach of basically listening to what the other person has to say, then definitely, yes, the writings of Dr. Ambedkar or the postings on Facebook about any activities of relating to Dalit consciousness, they definitely do have an influence for, especially for the people who do not read, people who cannot read, as in who don't have access to books, like the current lockdown situation, when you simply don't have any books at your disposal wherever everybody is sitting at their home. So the cyberspace offers a lot of potential in that direction, provided, of course, we have an open mind. And in this regard, I would say that um, the site that I mentioned of Columbia University, which gives original primary source materials of Dr. Ambedkar and his writings. Also, a website such as ambedkar.org. They have all the collected works of Dr. Baba Sahib Ambedkar. So, such authentic sites which have been there throughout, for a long time, they definitely have a good footprint. They definitely have a good influence as far as people are concerned. But then also there is this flip side, as I mentioned earlier, in relation to the Koregaon Bhima riots, that social media, morphing technologies, photoshopping, all these things, they can be really, really harmful in spreading lies. So it's a double-edged sword, as all technologies go.
There's a good observation, an amazing observation by Professor Mukhya, Harbans Mukhya, and his observation is excellent opening generalization. Any sort of consciousness is not originally organically linked to one's birth or location. One doesn't have to be born as a Dalit to develop Dalit consciousness, or to be a woman to develop feminist consciousness. The next question is from Ashish Kumar, and his question is, ma'am, is there any gap between Dalit consciousness and Dalit sensibility? If yes, then what are the differences between Dalit consciousness and sensibility?
Hmm. No, I wouldn't think that there is too much of a difference. I mean, only the verbal difference, yes, definitely, between a sensibility and consciousness. But this is something which prompts you to act and struggle against injustice. If that is the essence of it all, then sensibility, consciousness, any words, they would not really make too much of a difference to my mind.
We'll take two last questions before we summarize today's session. This question is from Dev Kumar Ahire, and his question is: where do you situate Dalit consciousness, a historiography, in intellectual landscape of historical development?
Hmm. Thank you. Um, Intellectual landscape of historical development. This has been more likely a modern phenomena, I would say, in terms of chronology. Yes, there have been thoughts put forth by the Dalit people, and as as one has researched in the field of ancient India as well, I can quote from Chandogya Upanishad, where the word Shudra is used in a very derogatory fashion. Sayugva Raikva is a person who wants to kind of, insult a king, and he says, "Go away, Shudra. I don't want your 500 cows, 600 cows. I don't want to help you out with whatever. So the idea that Shudra is something that is derogatory has been there for a long time. But the way we speak of the Dalit consciousness, as in it's a consciousness of being born in a particular, with a particular heritage or baggage of injustice, and also concomitant with that, the motive to the drive to struggle against it constantly. In this sense, I would say it's definitely a modern phenomenon. One can trace it back to the authors such as Jyotirao Phule. One can trace it back, of course, to Dr. Ambedkar. I mean, the biggest chunk of the credit should go to Dr. Ambedkar. But there are, as I took some names, Sant Ravidas has also the Begumpura and the concept of a utopia where one cannot really one need not face any of these inequalities. Such utopias, such visions of an ideal world have been there. Also, we have in Marathi Kanu Patra and Sokha Mela and Karma Mela. Many writers. But that I would brand as dissent literature, literature of dissent, wherein people, even Tukaram says, Amasi Navade Amuse Sanchita. So people are not ready to accept the baggage that has been imposed on their shoulders unwittingly. This was not my doing, that's what he says. But the consciousness of being Dalit, as I see it, is definitely a modern phenomenon. So I will look at it in the 19th and the 20th century and the 21st, of course.
So the last question for the evening is from Sukhdev Sohalji, and his question is, Professor Gayatri Chakravarti's PWalk talks about cognitive damage caused to lower caste people over centuries. So can we have a comment on that?
Hmm. I would say that this is not a damage only caused to the lower caste people. Earlier also I mentioned that this is a potential um, loss to the entire society. When you are losing out on the efforts, on the what is the right word, the skills, the intellect of more than first 50% women, they were denied the possibility of education. Then from among the men also, if you deny opportunities of education to over 40% people, then you are left with like 4 or 5% of the talent that you have from a pool of 100% talent. And as we know that intelligence is something that is defined as the ability to adapt to your surroundings. So a person who knows how to shear the the wool from the sheep, that person also has a very different kind of intellect, different kinds of sets of skills, as against the person who composes poems, as against a person who, whatever else, who cooks a good biryani, perhaps. So I would say that this is not a cognitive damage only to the Dalits. It's a cognitive damage to the society. Hmm.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for answering all the queries and for delivering today's presentation. And those who are watching us on YouTube and Facebook, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. The subscribe button is down just below this video. So just go and click on that button, click on the bell icon, and you'll get all the updates from Carvan. The presentation today was electrifying, moving, and I think words are not enough to describe today's session. And I think this session is going to open doors for more civilized and academic discussions on the Dalit studies, because I think this a part of history writing should be uh, made the focus of mainstream history now. So thank you so much, ma'am, for taking out time to deliver this lecture, and we hope to have you again in future as well.
Thank you so much.